What's for women? As I said in a little clip I just sent posting, I lost the end of the game, unfortunately. This doesn't happen too often, but and it's really a shame. It was kind of fun at the end. I think the situation was a foregone conclusion already, and it may trace all the way back to that initial button failure on the very first card play. It was not a close game by any means. The ending score was 38-10, which sounds closer, given that it has to be, you have to reach 36 or 13. It sounds relatively close, but honestly, there were just about no pieces on the board for the opposition. Actually, I think they had no pieces on the board. Everywhere except the northeast and the south, the suffragists were at least a +3 bonus, if not controlling the state. Now, one shocking thing happened where on a close state, I don't remember what it was, the suffragists used the rest of their 3 buttons, failed to get like Maine or something like that. And then very soon afterwards, Pennsylvania, that they had a +3 bonus on, they ended up losing because they had no buttons to protect it. Probably should have kept a button for one of those last, one of those big bonus states that somehow the die rolls just come out poorly. The oppositionists had to use their buttons much, much earlier in that final scoring phase. What this means is that whole final phase is omitted from the playthrough. It's not too big a deal. It's just dice roll-offs with bonuses for for cubes if you have them there. And you can re-roll your own dice by playing a button. But it's kind of exciting to do, and I spent a lot of time on that. I also spent time on the last 2 turns. One thing that I found was that the late, and I'm giving you stuff, this is going to be sort of a wrap review combined because I lost so much. The late cards, once Congress is in play, the late cards still tinker with Congress, some of them. What I found was most of the cards were used for pure campaigning purposes. Both players were able to get a bonus to get themselves from D4s to D6s, essentially. The suffragists got their 4th character, so they're rolling, 4 D6s and able to fight in the 2 areas that the oppositionists were in. They had more buttons overall than the oppositionists had, and just were in a much, much stronger position. They could basically hold even in the northeast and the south and fill out up to +3 in all the states in the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic. Yeah, I feel really shitty. I basically deleted my camera's memory, which turns out not to be a big deal for the camera. It seems to be working fine now. I was able to restore those sections, but yeah, there's just no trash bin or anything like that, and no way of easily kind of recovering the links to all of what's gone. I'm sure that computer forensics could have reconstructed it, given how quickly I shut the camera after realizing, oh shit, everything's gone. But yeah, as a game, this is very much what I needed right now. It was what I consider a comfort game. It plays, in terms of like a CDG, which it feels a lot like without the numbers to make a more difficult decision making on each card. The fact that the cards almost invariably are better as events in terms of just, if you're doing a cost-benefit analysis without any real specific goal in mind at that particular time, you want generally to get the most pips on states. The cards as events are better than using them for campaigning, especially early in the game when you don't have a lot of campaigners. Later in the game, 4 campaigners for the suffragists means that you can put a lot of cubes down with your cards, and the cards become much less valuable as events. And again, in the late game, I found that I was using almost all of the cards purely as campaigning cards. Let's see. Yeah, there's so much that I said that I can't even bring it all back, because this is like a review now in terms of only the shit that I remember makes it through, which is really a shame. Okay, I guess we'll start, and I feel so fucking horrible about this. I just like I should just give this shit up, you know. Okay, let's start with components to get my mind off of what's going on. Nice hard board. I think it's fairly utilitarian and pretty enough. It has a feel of the era with the imagery and whatnot. As often is the case towards the northeast, even with the off-board sections and whatnot, things get a little crowded up here. You're generally not putting more than 4 cubes in a space, although we did have 8 in Montana at one point. But it's functional, it's pretty, it does its job in every way. The actual pieces, you know, how can you complain about wooden cubes, you know? The check marks and X's, well, you know, perfectly fine, everything here. The only problem with these guys, I had the one break, you know, little wooden pieces that are jigsawed or whatever to push out elements like a flag or a beer mug or whatever. Yeah, they're going to be more delicate, and it was already damaged probably, you know, just through being shipped. These tokens, the buttons, yeah, they work fine. You know, they're the currency of the game. I'm really impressed with the amount of dice that came with this. That you know, it just it seems so strange to have a game give you so many different dice and whatever. They work well within the design. I haven't checked the Appobot yet, and probably never will, simply because I don't like solo design games. But at least not for solo. I might enjoy the cooperative game against the Appobot. But yeah, I mean, you know, they're high quality dice, and you get a whole bunch of them. I guess it's kind of important because, you know, if you're not a role player or whatever, 8-siders, 4-siders, you're not going to really have them, and it gives you a selection of those as well as the 6-siders that you need. It gives you colors for distinguishing when you're rolling opposed, which is kind of useful. So I can pull out like the Appobot dice, and I use them in the final thing so that I can play, you know, the red die versus the gray die on the dice-offs, and roll them both at once, rather than rolling one in each hand or something like that. The cards, obviously, modern quality, poker quality cards, good, you know, on that side of things. In terms of what they represent, the historical element is kind of given a very much background position on it, in that the historical information is there if you want to read it, but it doesn't glare out at you, it doesn't confuse you or anything like that. So if what you're focusing on is playing the game, you can do that a lot. And a lot of them, in a lot of card CDG style games, I don't know, the imagery and the historical text ends up kind of detracting from being able to see what you need to play the game. Here it's what you need to play the game is frontmost. However, what that does mean is that the historical stuff shifts back a little bit, and you may not notice it. You may have to want to find it a little bit more than you normally would. Let's take a look at some of these other cards. The state cards, it's an interesting decision. A certain number of states, there's only 12 that can have an effect on the game, and only 9 of them will be in play. I've got to get something about the regular deck. The strategy cards give you an interesting opportunity of things that you might want to buy using your buttons, or prevent the opponent from buying. That the use of the buttons is really, I think, one of the key decision-making things here. Do you need to move your campaigner? Do you need a reroll on this? Is this die roll that important? They become very, very important, and one of the things that they're very important for is the bidding on these, where sometimes there's cards out there that you just look at and you say, well, my button, this card has a value, a minimum value of X in buttons, and I can just, look at that and make that decision immediately. And then the question is, am I willing to bid more than that in order, to get an actual card, to assure I get a card, and whatever. It's a nice mechanism there. It gives all the advantages to the opposition player in terms of order. The opposition player can overbid by one and take something. The suffragist is forced to make a certain bid before to evaluate the cards and make a decision how much they're worth, and then the opposition player gets the option to just say, okay, I'm not going to let you have that for that, or I'm going to take that from you for that, or spend nothing and let you have it because I think you're spending too much for it. Of course, they don't know, what the suffragist is holding in cards. The opposition deck is very much like the player decks in terms of presentation. Again, I don't know how it plays out, but basically, it's going to be the opposition player, with slightly different cards, presumably, and different instructions to make the opposition work better. Now, I wanted to talk about the ordering of the cards. This is kind of important. So, I found myself, again, not using the events in the late deck, in part because Congress was gone by the time I got to the late deck. The late deck didn't come out until the 6th turn, and very few of the cards in the late deck came out because of that. Now, that throws a lot of interesting things into mind. I didn't see all the late decks, so I don't know. There may be some very powerful cards in there for the kind of endgame that I was playing. I didn't see many. All I saw were the boost the campaign die rolls, which maybe were being held from the middle deck, actually, because you keep a card each time. But yeah, it turned out that the late deck cards that I saw weren't terribly valuable then. They might have been worth trying to accelerate. So I had the one accelerating or accelerant card in the opposition side, which I chose not to play because I didn't know what the later cards were going to be like. And I think it was not a bad choice. I think using the card to accelerate the deck would not be particularly advantageous. Likewise, the cards that allow you to draw 2 events and pick one and play it. Those are kind of interesting because early in the game, the events tend to be powerful. So doing that early in the game is valuable. But later in the game, you may draw 2 events, neither of which really help you all that much. I actually did play one event, I think, for the suffragists. I think it created more pips. It gave buttons and created pips on the final turn. And it was supposed to move Congress as well. But I still chose to play it, even though it didn't do everything that it could have done, because what it did was better than I could gain otherwise. Mainly the gaining of the buttons. Again, the buttons are important. You want to have a pile of them when you go into that end game dice off so that you get rerolls. Balance is impossible for me to talk about because, first of all, I started off the game giving the suffragist a little bit of an advantage, or maybe a big advantage, it's hard to tell, because I forgot the buttons that were assigned on the start cards. I wouldn't know that I did that, and I'd probably be saying, wow, I feel like the suffragists had an easier time. It wasn't it wasn't a complete blowout in terms of final score, but it felt like a complete blowout in terms of cubes that were on the board. People who were actually, opposed to giving votes to women. There were no more of them left. They were wiped out. Some of that was by luck. There probably should have been 4 or 5 cubes on the board, giving some modifiers to states to swing them closer to the opposition, which might have ended up, it was close enough that those extra couple of pieces might have been enough to swing things, although the opposition did pretty well in the empty states. So like I say, this feels like a comfort food type of game to me, which means I don't have to agonize. The decisions that I get to make felt very, very clean. It felt better than most CDGs do. I have a tendency to like to play events anyway in CDGs over playing and trying to do the things that I'm trying to do. I tend to be happier with playing the events in them, especially in the political stuff and whatnot. It was very, very refreshing to me to see one where that style of play that I just am drawn to anyhow actually worked really, really well. But I know a lot of players, what they favor in a CDG is that agonizing decision making. Do I use these points for the thing I'm planning on, or do I use this event card that, wow, I didn't know this was going to come up, and it would be really helpful, and it's not really my plan. I'm much more of an opportunistic player than I am one who can stick, and be dedicated to achieving a certain goal using my points. I did find that very refreshing. I could see where some players wouldn't like that at all. In addition, so one thing that I brought up in that final video that didn't make it to my computer somehow is that there are no reaction cards. There's nothing that you have to pay attention to in your hand while the other player's going. You can be, doing whatever you like during that other player's turn, and then you just focus on your own hand on your own turn, whatever. So you don't have to be constantly worrying. That's especially a big deal the way I play things, where I'm trying to manage multiple players at the same time. It's sometimes very, very hard to remember that I have something that can interfere with the enemy. More than that, though, even in an opposed play, I will often forget that I have something that I can be doing. My mind's somewhere else. I'm babbling, chatting with people, whatever. I have, very little interest in spending the downtime focusing on the game in any game. So my style of play kind of is antithetical to that. Of course, there's the playbook that I talked about and all the reproductions of the historical documents. I understand, again, this was a love letter to the movement, but it doesn't mean much to me, but it may mean something to you. They're very well done and nicely produced. Let me think what else. It plays relatively rapidly. That's a nice feel to it. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I really, really liked it. And this is something that, like other comfort food games, if I was in a world where I didn't have too many games, this would get a fair amount of replays over time, simply because Light Rules plays itself fairly nicely. And I really mean that. It plays itself, You have to step in and make decisions and whatnot, but they're not ones that hurt. At least they don't hurt me to have to make. A lot of these political games. So this shares a lineage, say, going to 1960 as the first of a whole series of these type of games. Most of these political games put you on kind of an even footing between the two players as well. So what's kind of neat about this one is that it is very clearly not an even footing. Now there's ones, some of the multiplayer ones don't feel like an even footing. Most especially Bull Moose, where it's going to be really hard to win with the socialists, or the Dries. It's just, it's gonna require the other players doing some really weird shit for you to get a chance to make your goal there. But here it's an asymmetrical two-player situation where one player starts with a very, very strong position to begin with and has different capabilities. So the campaigning ability to say, women shouldn't be allowed to vote, we should have never taught them to talk. And no, they shouldn't be allowed shoes. We haven't done that yet, have we? But that very strong position of the conservative stance versus a much more capable of campaigning and making a good argument for why the Declaration of Independence should apply equally, why women are not subhuman essentially, which is what the other stance basically says, right? They are less than human. They're, we can make a good argument why children shouldn't be allowed to vote, right? Or maybe senile people. Well, women were seen very much in that same kind of way. There might be exceptional cases, but for the most part, they're just not. They're too emotional, or they're too emotional. How many times do you see women engaging in duels? But it was it's an interesting framework to be able to explore in terms of that asymmetric structure, where you're trying to collect up what looks like the little vote cubes and everything, but it's a little different. First of all, the job of the suffragists is harder. They have to succeed in some ways. They have to do two things. They have to get the vote count up on the board in individual states, get enough states under their control that they can at least not lose very quickly. And they have to convert Congress. And if they convert Congress too soon and get that vote in play, that means that they will just lose the game because the states will go against them. And, because their burden is so high, even empty states aren't a good thing, right? Empty states are going to skew towards the opposition side. Now, here's the thing. You have as many turns as you need. You have as many turns as the game lasts to be able to collect up those extra cubes. So the thing you want to avoid is looking at a situation where the opposition is sitting on close to 13 states with 4 cubes in each of them at the early part of the game. If you push Congress when the opposition's in that kind of status, they could very quickly close down the vote ahead of time. There were some things that this game didn't do that I had kind of hopes for. I was hoping for sort of a multi-plane situation. And I mean, it's there. You have Congress and you have the states, but they're two separate, completely separately. They're exclusive of each other in every way. They don't influence one another. Whereas I felt like there were a number of things that, as a historical model, could be explored, and I would have liked to have seen. For example, that the amount of states that are in play grows over the game in terms of, sure, you can put influence into territories and whatnot, but historically, those territories did not have any say whatsoever in Congress. Well, for the most part. You can make arguments, but... and so each turn, different states would be added, and that would increase both the size of Congress that you need to influence, but also I don't know what also. Okay, it would increase the size of Congress you need to influence. The other thing that I wanted to deal with there had to do with that politicians in Congress would be very unlikely to support a radical change, like allowing women to vote, unless their state as a whole supported that to some extent. And, I can think of some little mechanisms that could add to that. As the game stands, they're sort of, and I think I talked about this in a video that made it up. I know I talked about it. As the game stands, there's sort of a design for effect mechanism in play that takes care of that, which is that you don't want, as the suffragist, to push Congress too far unless you have your nest egg of states. Unless you have reduced the power of the oppositionist in enough states that they're not going to be able to swing the game to an automatic loss for you by being able to convert 13 of those states to solid no votes. Because once Congress is in play, states that get 4 cubes are fixed. They will not, they get a check or an X, they're for or against, and they will not change their mind on that, ever. That's not really how things work. You can have multiple referenda in order to try to ratify something once Congress accepts it, but again, that mechanism in play makes it so that the suffragist player will not want to bring the vote to Congress. And you could make an argument that this isn't that terrible a thing, that a Congress that was fundamentally opposed, and I said this as well, that a Congress that's fundamentally opposed to giving the right of the vote to women would perhaps, seeing that the states were going to not ratify it, pass it anyhow, just to give them the humiliation of the states failing. If people were saying, oh, it's Congress that's holding us up, okay, fine, we'll pass it. Bring it to the states. Let's see what happens. And then, so many of the states fail to ratify, and give it a nice, like a 5-year time limit or something, so it just dies on the vine. And then it would be harder to bring this same issue up for maybe generations. Of course, the length of the game is generations anyway, so it's kind of tough to make that argument that, like, one failed vote means that the game is over. There's a lot of stuff playing around in there. The truth is, why do I want it? Not, because it makes a better game, but more because it gives more detail about the mechanisms involved in this. One of the nice things about the game is its very simplicity. So, you start adding the kind of shit that I'm talking about, and maybe you break what's so good about the game. I really liked this one. I wish I could have gotten that last video up. I'm so fucking pissed about it. And, it's not like anything all that exciting happened. What is all that exciting that happens in games anyway? Maybe if, like, my arm fell off in the middle of it or something, that would be cool. But, cool shit happened. It was enjoyable to play through. I was having fun. It's a good distraction. A game like this is a good distraction where I want to come up and I want to keep playing it once it starts. And it was hard for me to go down and do my addiction even, which, that is where we want me to be. Unfortunately, it's not where we're going to be, and I'm going to sink back into it when I enter into the NBS stuff again. All right, I'm going to send this up again. Big apologies to everyone who was watching. I tried to give at least the final score, some of the information about it and whatnot, but was just paying attention to the wrong thing. I was watching a video while I was trying to deal with stuff. The camera, getting it hooked up so that I can deal with the file system and whatnot on it, takes some time, and I just was not paying attention to the right stuff and deleted the file system that the camera is recording to now. All right, up it goes.